The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. The following session has already been informed. We are going to hear testimony of TCW 338, not 366 as I stated. It was a mistake, and I wish to correct it now. Court officer is now instructed to bring in TCW 338. The President. Good morning, Mr. Witness. We note that you have already been briefed on how to use the microphone. However, allow us to remind you that before you respond to any questions, wait until you see the red light is activated on the mic. Otherwise, your message will not be properly conveyed through rendition and cannot be properly recorded. So after each question, you should observe a pause. Wait until you see that red light before you proceed to respond to any questions. Mr. Witness, what is your name? Could you please tell your name in full to the chamber? Response. I am Kum Von alias Chaum. The President. Thank you. How old are you? Response. I am 53 years old. Question. Where do you live? Response. Mr. President, I live in Pahi Tabong, Pailan District, Pailan. Question. What do you do for a living? Response. I am a government employee working at the Department of Telecommunication and Post. Question. What is your father's name? Response. He was deceased. His name was Pech. Question. Did he have a family name? The President, could you please hold on, wait until you see the red light before you proceed to respond to us. Otherwise, your message will be lost. The President, please tell the court your father's first name. Response, my father was Kumpich. Question, what is your mother's name? Response, she was Tu Sdang, now deceased. Question, what is your wife's name? Question, I am asking about your current wife's name. Response, she is Mia Somniang. Question, how many children do you have? Response, I have only a daughter with her. The President, thank you. How far did you go to school? Did you learn how to read and write Khmer? Response, when I was young during the former regime, I did not go to school very far. I was at 7th grade only. Question, do you read and write Khmer these days? Response, yes, I do, Mr. President. The President, thank you. Mr. Kumbun, according to the report by the greffier of the trial chamber, and according to your best capacity and knowledge, you have no relationship with any individual of the civil parties being admitted in case file 002, and you are not related to any of the accused persons, including Mr. Nuon Chia, Khieu Sampon, and Ieng Sari. Is that correct? Response, yes, it is, Your Honors. The President, according to the greffier's report, you had already taken an oath. The oath was taken on the 15th of August 2012. Is that correct? Response, yes, it is. The President, I will proceed to inform you of your rights as a witness before the chamber. As the witness before the chamber, Mr. Kumwun, you can refuse to respond or make any statement that are self-incriminating. You enjoy the right not to self-incriminate. At the same time, you are obliged as a witness to give testimony before this chamber by responding to all the questions posed to you by parties and the chamber, except the statement or responses that are incriminating. In that case, you can refuse to do so. And as the witness, you are obliged to tell the truth, nothing but the truth. The truth based on your recollection of the events you saw, you witnessed during that time. Do you understand these duties and obligations? Response, yes, I do, Mr. President. The President, Thank you, Mr. Kumwun. Have you ever given interviews to the investigators from the Office of Co-Investigating Judges during the last few years before you appear before this chamber? And if so, how many interviews did you give to them and where were they conducted? Response: I had given 3 interviews. However, there were only 2 official documents recording these 2 interviews. The President: do you still recollect where was the interview conducted and on which date? Response: Mr. President, I'm afraid I don't remember the exact date and place, but I remember that I had 3 interviews. Question: could you say where were the interviews conducted then? Response: I gave the interview at my office, the Office of Telecommunication of the province. The President: you said you gave 3 interviews, but then only 2 records of the interviews were kept formally. What happened to this? Response: on the 3rd occasion, I was attending a workshop on planning and development, and the investigators could not wait for me, and they had to come back to perform other tasks instead. The President: thank you. Before you appear before this chamber, had you have an opportunity to read the interviews, the records of the interviews you gave on 2 occasions before the investigators? Response: yes, I had, Mr. President, briefly. The President: according to your best recollection, can you tell the court whether your reading of the record of your interviews reflect your statements given to the investigators previously? Response: Mr. President, yes, the statements are consistent. The President: thank you. The Chamber wishes to inform the co-prosecution that the prosecution will be given the floor to pose questions to the witness, and at the same time the Chamber wishes to also inform parties that the co-prosecutors will have a quarter of the full day session for each party. So each party will have this time to put questions to the witness. They may make the most of their time to select only the most potentially important questions to be posed to the witness. Now, the prosecution, you may now proceed. Mr. Wayne Hart. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors, and good morning, my learned colleagues and everyone in this courtroom. Good morning to you, Mr. Kumwun. I am from the Office of Co-Prosecutors. I will have some questions concerning the printing house. However, if my questions are believed to be difficult to understand, please do not hesitate to ask me for clarification or ask me to repeat the questions. Without further ado, I would like now to ask you a few questions concerning your statements before the co-investigators. You stated that in February 1971, you joined work at the front printing house in Santuk district along the Chinit River. It was Pol Pot's base, and people who managed the office was by the person by the name Pang. This document can be found under document 00357197 in Khmer, English 00365642, and ERNs in French 00485429. With regard to your statement, I have a few questions as follows. First, why did you go and work at the central printing house, not elsewhere? Response. At that time, during the Funk regime, the leadership of the district and the central level came to the base, and I had some friends, the elder brothers, who convinced me to leave the village to work for the district. I worked at that time in the village for the nationalist youth group, and I had no choice. I had only a mother, and I could not decide to leave her behind. However, elder brothers from the center and from the district kept coming to persuade me to join the group. And finally, I was convinced that I could work at the central office and be allowed to come back to visit my village. And I also was thinking that if I had to work at the district, I had to work in the military. So at that time, I was an orphan. Mr. Wayne Hort. Thank you, Mr. Witness. I would like now to ask you another question. Did you acquire printing skill before you got the job? Response. No, I didn't. However, I could write Khmer nicely, and I could perform office tasks. Question. How old were you at that time? The President, witness, could you please be reminded again? Your message was lost because you were responding when the mic was not activated. Mr. Wayne Hort, I would like to proceed to repeat the question. You said you had no choice to work but to work at the printing house. How old were you when you worked there? Response. I was more than 10 years old. Question. In your statement through the investigators, you indicated that you was 12 at that time. My next question. Were only young people as young as 12 like you recruited to work at the printing house? Mr. Wingwood, Mr. Witness, could you please be reminded that wait until you see the red light? Response. During that regime, a lot of young people as young as I was were asked to join the work, and some of my relatives who were children were also introduced to the task before me. Question. Including yourself, other children were recruited to work at the printing house. Could you tell us your first impression when you started work at the printing house? Response. There was no quiet impression anyway, because the work was assigned. I was appointed to the task, and if anyone was appointed, then one had to work effectively as being ordered to do so. Question. With regard to the printing house, you said it was located in Santok district on the Chinat River. How far was the printing house from the place where Pol Pot would stay? Response. The printing house was a few kilometers from his place. It was in the jungle. Question. When you started working at the printing house, how long was that before you met with Pang? Response. I had to stay at office T40 at Bang Lavia, and I had to cross Chinat River to Kilo number 3 to Low 64, where I stayed there. Question. My question was about meeting with Pang. When did you meet him, or was Pang in charge of the printing house? Response. First, I didn't meet him, but later on learned that the office was under Pang's supervision. Question. What was your actual skill or expertise? Response. I was good at writing, and I was assigned to write on pieces of paper. So I was asked to practice writing I was asked to practice writing on a daily basis. Question. Do you still recollect what kind of writing was that? Can you tell us the content of the writing? Response. I learned to write on the pieces of paper. We used pen, and then there would be a few pages underneath so that we could write on the first page, and then the message could be copied into the beneath pages before it could be printed. Question. Do you remember the content of the writing? What was it about? Just give us some examples. Response. First, we made a small booklet, and the booklet was about Cao Nhal. Question. I think I missed that statement. Could you say again what the book was about? Response. The booklet that I practiced writing on was about I was asked to write on a piece of paper so that it could be copied into at least 3 other copies, and then we made a booklet with that text about a person by the name of Cao Nhal, the former resistance activist. Question. In that printing house, you said at a later date you met with Bang. How many people were there at the printing house? I mean, the young people like yourself. The President. Mr. Witness, could you please be reminded again that the mic has to be activated before you proceed to respond? Otherwise, you will never be heard. Respond, or rather question. I would like to repeat the question. You stated earlier on that Bang was the person in charge of the printing house. Now, my question is, how many people were recruited to work at the printing house? And how many young people or children as young as yourself altogether in that place? Response. In the outset, there were only 2 children, young people, I myself and another person by the name Ol. And then we had other people from Karachi province and elder brothers. At the beginning, there were only 4 people to start the printing house. Question. I would like to know from you, what kind of documents were being printed at the printing house? Response. There were some documents I saw being printed there, as I already indicated. documents that we were assigned to write about. There were other documents also relevant to the front affairs. News to be sent to the radio station were also printed there. And we also had the telegram where by which telegrams could be sent to brothers of the North, for example. Question: had you ever seen Revolutionary Flags magazine or Youth Flag magazines printed at the place? Response: at that printing house, only front-related documents were ever printed. Question: do you recollect information relevant to the work of the front? If you do, please tell us briefly. Response: the affairs of the front included news from the battlefields, statements by the leadership in French or in Latin, and also the telegrams. But I was attached to the printing house, so I was tasked with writing only. Question: I also would like to know whether those documents were typed or handwritten before they were printed.
The documents at the time were mostly handwritten, and then they were copied through bound paper, and then they were sent for printing. Did you ever review the content of those documents? Response: yes, I did. I reviewed the content and tried to comprehend it before I could write. Mr. Weinhuet, Mr. President, with your leave, I would like to have one document display on the screen, and document E3/637. E3/637. French Khmer ERN 00442332. English ERN 00740938. French 00752174.
ខ្ញុំសូមអានជូនសាកសីតែម្ដងប្រសិនបើសាកសីដឹងខ្លឹមសារហើយ
I would like to read it out for the witness, and if he understands the content of this document, then I will put the question. Bravo, the brave people and Cambodian People's Liberation Armed Forces throughout the country. This is a quotation. The second quotation quotes, "Bravo, great victories to our people and the Cambodian People's Liberation Armed Forces in every battlefield."
លោកបាន
You said just now that you reviewed the content and you normally read the content of the documents. Did you read all the contents of the document sent for printing at the printing house? The President, Mr. Kim Vun, can you respond to that question? If you are not able to respond to this question because you cannot recollect it, then you can ask the prosecutor again so that he may repeat the question or he can move on to the next question. Witness, Mr. President, can the prosecutor be directed to repeat the question? Prosecutor, thank you, Mr. Kim Vun. I am trying to read out portion of this document. In the content of this document, the word "bravo," the brave people and Cambodian People's Liberation Armed Forces throughout the country, and "bravo, great victories to our people and the Cambodian People's Liberation Armed Forces in every battlefield." Did you ever hear these slogans, and were they ever printed in the printing house where you worked? Response, I do not recall this. Do you not recall the printing of these slogans, or did you not recall these slogans at all? Response, these two slogans were quite common at that period of time. Thank you. I am going to read another portion of the document E3/637. I just would like to ask whether or not you recall that these phrases or content were printed at that time. In Khmer, EON 00442328. English 00740933. French 00752170. I would like to read it as follows. And three Khmer was arrested and as the war prisoners. Rather, the two battalions of Black Eagles and Chandrangsis, along with many of the enemy's reinforcement squads, had been smashed, injured, killed, and deserted, and been made prisoners of war. According to an interim report, some 1,550 heads of the enemy's military personnel and officers, including hundreds colonels, captains, lieutenants, and major lieutenants, have been smashed, while 10,000 of people have been liberated. And Cambodian People's Liberation Armed Forces have been attacked by six main sites have been liberated, and 1,200 heads of enemy's armed forces personnel were smashed, killed, injured, and deserted. Do you still recall these statements? Response. In fact, at that time, we broadcast this common statement in both the radio and also printed it in magazines. Prosecutor, thank you, Mr. Kumvun. I move on. So, following the publication of the documents, did they distribute those documents? The documents were distributed to the base, particularly to the liberated zones. Do you still recall who came to collect the documents for further distribution to the liberated zones? The books published from the printing house were distributed through messengers to the liberated zone at the base. Did you ever participate in the distribution or dissemination of those documents? Generally, during the period, the tasks were clearly divided. Those people had to mind their own business, and if it was not my task, I was not supposed to distribute any document. My task was at the printing house. I did not do anything else. Question. Because why were you not authorized to distribute this document? Was it because the document has had any confidential nature? Respond. As a matter of fact, I was working with the printing house, and I was not supposed to go outside of the printing house. It was the duty and job of the messengers to distribute those documents. Question. You said you could not walk out of the printing house premise. What was your impression? Was your freedom of movement limited at the time? Response. In general, we had to maintain our job in utmost secrecy, otherwise we would be targeted and maybe bombarded from aerial attack. So we had to maintain secrecy. If they single out any location, then we would be air raid. So we could not go out freely at that time. Question. Who told you that this task was to be kept confidential, and who warned you not to leave your working premise? The officer in charge, as I told you earlier on, there were only 4 members, but later on more people came to join us. And after that, it was the directors who supervised the place gave me the instruction and advice not to leave the place. Question. I now move on to the next question relating to your practical work. In your capacity as a young man, how many days per week were you supposed to work, and how many hours per day were you allowed to take rest? In wartime, we had to divide our work clearly, regardless of our age. We had to help each other. We had to do whatever task we could do. For example, we could prepare food for each other or carry waters. And other than that, we had to help each other. For example, at that times we live in the forest. We had to remind each other of the health concern, the infection. We had to ensure that we live in a hygiene place. We had to have toilets properly, and otherwise we would be affected by many diseases. We had to have mosquito nets and hammocks, and particularly we had to be vigilant at all time of the air raid. And as for the task, we had different work shifts. We had to divide it in turns. But whenever we had to do it on an offensive basis, we did not have to mind each other's work. We had to do it all the time without thinking of the working hours per day or so at all. Question. So I would like to expand on this. You said you had a lot of things to do, and you were still very young at that time. Did you ever meet the leaders of the front? And if you did, who did you meet? The leaders whom I knew as the leader was Cam. Question. I cannot really catch your answer. Can you please repeat your answer? Who were the leaders of the front? Did you know their official names or their revolutionary names? At that time, I was very young. I only knew Brother Haim, who visited that place once in a while. And then later on, I learned that Brother Haim was actually Mr. Kieu Sampon. When you met Brother Haim, which was the revolutionary name, where did you meet him? And in that circumstance, what did you do and what did he have to do at that time? So my question really is, where did you meet him and why did he go there? Response. At that time, Brother Haim went to the printing house. Sometimes he simply came to say hello, and at other times he came and brought along with him some food stuff to provide to people working at the printing house in order to encourage them, motivate them to continue to struggle. Thank you, says Mr. Wainwood. Mr. President, that is all for me. I would like to now hand over to my esteemed colleague. Thank you.
Mr. President, Your Honours, can I formally introduce myself? My name is Keith Rayner, and I'm a barrister from England. Mr. Kim Vaughan, I'd like to take up, please, on some of the questions that you've been asked and to ask some clarification questions. And the first is to do with statements by the leadership. Now, you've just said in court a few minutes ago that the affairs of the front included news from the battlefields and statements by the leadership in French and also telegrams. So how often, when you were employed at this printing house after 1971, did statements from the leadership come to the printing house?
As a matter of fact, at that time there were a lot of documents, and normally the leaders never came to the printing house themselves. More often than not, the messengers carry those documents to the printing house.
Did you stay at this printing house from 1971 through to 1975 at the same place or not?
Well, actually, we had to change several places. To my recollection, we changed the place 3 times. The first one being along Chinet Tributary, and then the second place was Office 24, and then later on it was moved to B20, and following 1975 it was moved to somewhere adjacent to the Olympic Stadium.
Just so that I have it correctly, it's right then that you stayed in the job associated with printing right from 1971 through to 1975 when you were working near the Olympic Stadium. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
In this period, from 1971 to 1975, who decided what was going to be published?
The detailed work of as such I did not know, but normally we receive the documents from messengers. Rarely did the leaders bring along with them documents. Most of the times those documents were delivered to us by messengers.
You've also mentioned that there was news that went to the radio station. Now, where was the radio station in relation to the printing house?
The radio station of the Fong was based in China. Because at that time we could send news articles and we telegram it for broadcast. And in 1973, 74 and 75 they established a radio station in B20. It was close to the printing house.
You mentioned that ultimately, or certainly at some stage, the printing house was located at B20. What was the geographic location of B20?
To my knowledge, B20 was located in Stung Trong district in the jungle as well as the rubber plantation. The land over there was fertile.
I'd like to deal with the following question in this way. You mentioned, and we'll come to this later, that you entered Phnom Penh in April 1975. I want you to use April 1975 as a marker. Now, how long before April 1975 were you first at B20?
When soon before the liberation of Phnom Penh, I was with B20, and at that time our team at the printing house was not moved to Phnom Penh yet. They moved those who work in the radio station first. And sometime on the 20th or so, I went to Phnom Penh. We traveled along the way through Prek Dam and Preket Tomilia hospital, and then we got to Phnom Penh. We had to take the boat at that time to reach Phnom Penh because the roads were cut cut in different places, so we had to take by waterway to reach Phnom Penh.
Help me then, please, either in days, weeks, or months. How long were you personally located at B20 at Stung Trong?
Response. I do not recollect how long I had remained there, but I had been there for at least 10 years. Rather, yeah. Says the witness.
The English translation of that was that you'd been at B20 for 10 years. Is that what you meant?
Response. No, I think that was not correct because the war took place for no longer than 5 years. I could have never been there more than that. So I could be in between these 5 years period that I was at that location, but I don't recollect exactly how long I was there.
Whatever the length of the period was that you were at B20, was the printing house effective producing documents for the whole of that period?
Response. I had remained in the printing house even though the location was relocated time and again, and I still worked at the printing house even when in Phnom Penh, and I helped them write the headings of the articles, or I helped with other publishing tasks by helping with the cover of the printed materials and also the pictures for the magazines. However, I was more involved in writing rather than in technical aspect of the publishing. I later worked in the newspaper section, and I also helped produce the picture magazines. The President, thank you, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, and thank you, Mr. Witness. It is now appropriate time for lunch adjournment. The court will adjourn during this period, and the next session will be resumed by 1:30 p.m. Court officer is now instructed to assist Mr. Witness during the adjournment and have him return to the courtroom by 1:30. Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell. He is suffering from a headache, back pain, and a general lack of concentration, and we have prepared the waiver.
The President, the Chamber has noted the request by Mr. Nguyen Chia through his counsel, in which he has requested that he be allowed to observe the proceedings from downstairs for the remainder of the day due to his health concern. He indicated that he could not remain seated in this courtroom for a long period of time. In light of that, the Chamber therefore grants such request. Through that, Mr. Nguyen Chia is now allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell, and he has expressly waived his right to participate directly in the courtroom. The chamber asks that counsels for Mr. Nguyen Chia produce the waiver immediately, the waiver that is signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Nguyen Chia to the chamber, and every booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the holding cell is connected to the audio-visual link so that Mr. Nguyen Chia can observe the proceedings from there. And security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nguyen Chia and Khieu Sampon to their respective holding cell, and have Mr. Khieu Sampon return to the courtroom when the next session resumes.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោយចូល